This is a panel on Kickstarter and anything else that brings up. I'm Steve Jackson.
My name is Chris Ling.
And we both have enough experience on Kickstarter that we think we might be able to give some useful advice.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot I think we're going to go over today, including things to do and probably not to do, which I'm very familiar with, the latter.
So I assume everybody knows what crowdfunding is and specifically what Kickstarter is. Who here has participated in a Kickstarter campaign? Several, okay. And just briefly shouting out in one or two words, how did they go? Yeah? Good, okay. I have done, well, I've lost track of how many now. I'm doing them through my company rather than as an individual. We started off with our biggest one, which was big for reasons that I hope to get into, but we are doing at least one project every couple of months now, and we're finding them very useful. Sometimes they are to introduce products that we will put into the supply chain and let people pick them up at their local retailer. Some of them are for games that we will only, after the Kickstarter, sell in our own online store.
On our side, in our 10-year history at Sekai Project, we've launched over 20 Kickstarter and a couple Indiegogo campaigns. And the majority of the stuff are for games that we've released digitally, but through Kickstarter and crowdfunding, that's how we've been able to produce physical items, whether it's games, merchandise, so on and so forth. So it's actually been a very interesting experience. It definitely has its uses, and again, we'll probably go into a lot of details and maybe a couple war stories about, at least on our end, a number of situations where successful campaign does not mean everything went well, that there were still a lot of pitfalls that we did not consider at the time. So it's going to be interesting to talk
Absolutely agree with that one, Chris. I think of all our campaigns, the one we made the most mistakes on was also the one we made the most money on, just because it was bigger.
Yes, sometimes, on the outside for users, they'll look at a campaign like, wow, they raised so much money, it's going to be great. They've got all these stretch goals, these fantastic rewards. And sometimes you find a situation where you're spending so much time on these stretch goals that suddenly you don't spend the time on focusing on the main purpose of the campaign, or maybe you didn't allocate the funds properly, which has happened for us. And the worst thing is if it takes a while to get it to the finish line, you realize your shipping costs have actually increased from when you started. So you can't go to the back and like, hey, so we took a bit of time. Can you spot us another $20, $30? Guy in Canada? No? Oh, all right, that's unfortunate.
There was actually one big campaign that did that, and they just thought they had PR troubles before that.
Yeah.
The reaction was very, very unfavorable, and I can't blame anybody for that. There are other crowdfunding platforms than Kickstarter. He mentioned Indiegogo. That Kickstarter is the one we have the most experience with, and it's the one that we will continue to use in the foreseeable future. I guess I'll step into the minefield by saying I don't find Indiegogo as generally useful. How does it work for you?
I'll be entirely honest with you. It wasn't my own personal decision to use Indiegogo at the time. So a bit of background. So for the couple of games that we did on Indiegogo, at the time, through our sub-brand Dempasoft, we actually do release adult titles as well. And this is something that in the terms of service, you're not supposed to actually put up on Kickstarter, though certain campaigns from other companies, which I will not comment on, seems to say otherwise. It is what it is. We did not know at the time, and Indiegogo liked to fashion itself as being more open-minded, for better or for worse. But to your point, Steve, I I don't know if you guys actually tried Indiegogo at all.
Oh,
but-
yes,
okay.
we have done 3 or 4 Indiegogo
Okay.
campaigns.
I found it that yes, it's nice to have alternatives, but it definitely did not have the reach that I was expecting. We got our funding goals for what it's worth, but it seemed slightly more difficult than it should have been, and that's why after that we went straight through Kickstarter up until now.
Indiegogo doesn't have the reach, and some people really disagree with some of the Indiegogo terms of service and wrote us in very direct terms to tell us why we should not be using Indiegogo and why they were sorry, but they weren't going to back this campaign. Now, we have never had any problems in dealing with the Indiegogo staff. The software seems to work. It's just, for us, not quite as effective a platform.
I mean, the thing that people, I guess supporters of Indiegogo would say that the nice part is, so with Kickstarter, if you're not aware of, the creators do not get the funding unless you hit the funding goal. So if you don't do that, it's all or nothing. They make it very clear. You're 99%, you didn't hit it, guess what? It's over, refunds, and that's the end of it. With Indiegogo, there's an option that you can either indefinitely fund or get partial. Like you hit 30%, well, you got the 30%, which I suppose it serves some purposes, but if you're so far off from your goal, you're not going to be able to do anything with that amount. So it does seem kind of counterintuitive to the point of doing crowdfunding, at least the way I look at it.
That's correct. You don't want, I mean, let's say you're planning a publication project and your break-even point is 500 copies and you'd like to sell 1,000. So let's say you go on Indiegogo and you only get 300 backers. If you have chosen unwisely on Indiegogo, you're going to get the money and the obligation for those 300 backers, but not enough money to do your print run. And you're going to be very unhappy and lose money on the deal. Now, money is not the only thing that a crowdfunding project is about, but usually you have to keep money in the forefront of your mind. It's also about gaining exposure. You simply have to make sure you don't pay too much for that exposure. And of course, if you can make $1 million, that's better yet. But very few campaigns go anywhere near that crazy. We had one that easily could have broken $1 million if we had kept adding stretch goals, but we already had too many stretch goals. We were stretched, see what I did there. We were stretched way too thin. And that's to be avoided. Sometimes you have to say, that's enough. We're not going to give you any more to spend your money on. Please tell your friends about us and let them come spend their money.
I mean, to Steve's point, one of the beauties of Kickstarter, because of their reach, is that it is an excellent tool for promotion. Though I feel, the criticism is there are some users that will look at companies, maybe perhaps such as ours, where it's like you're using it as a form of pre-order, and that kind of goes a little bit against the spirit of crowdfunding. So yes, it's an excellent promotional tool, but with some of the clients we've worked with in the past, where they tell me, yes, we need a funding goal of $10,000. Okay, what's that for? Oh, just to promote the game. It's like, people are going to look really badly on this. Are you sure we should do crowdfunding? And they insist we run the campaign, get a lot of flack for it because we're clearly not using it for what it's supposed to be done. And so these are just, again, a lot of the things you do have to think about. If you decide that crowdfunding is the way you want to go, be very clear about the purpose, because the last thing you want to do is mislead effectively your investors, your backers.
That's true. That's completely true. And my company does from time to time do a Kickstarter that is a pre-order method, and we try to be upfront about people with that. We say there aren't going to be any stretch goals. Sometimes that's because we have baked all of the stretch goals originally planned into the product. But On the one hand, it is definitely not in the spirit of the original creators of Kickstarter to use it for pre-orders. On the other hand, in the words of William Gibson, the street finds its own uses for things. Kickstarter is a very, very effective, seamless way for getting pre-orders, as long as you know exactly what it is you plan to sell and what you plan to sell it for, and as long as you're upfront with people about either there are no stretch goals or there are token stretch goals. Now, if you're doing it that way, again, you have to be sure not to set a token funding goal. Set a realistic funding goal so the campaign will fail if it doesn't bring in enough to pay for itself. Better a failed campaign than a failed company.
100%, especially talking about funding goals. A bit of a story on our end. So most people know our company as game publisher, but the very first product we ever put out was actually this book here, the Moe Headphones Guidebook. Thank you for your patronage. And so this book is it's a review on audio headgear and has some interviews and fantastic artwork in there. And so when we formed our company, it was not for games. It was actually for books, music, and lo and behold, we clearly didn't know what we were doing, and we're a game publisher, and thus life goes on. But the thing was, we did not know the scope of how to print, because we decided to print these in Japan, because these books, it's basically done the Japanese doujinshi style, and book printers, especially low minimums, Japan is the place to do it. Here, it's a little bit more tricky. They're expecting 2,000, 3,000. I'm asking for 500. And so we asked the creator, Lunatic Joker, can you help us with the printing? And the gentleman, he's very good at what he does. He's a designer by trade, and he makes this gorgeous book with the metal cover. You can feel the texture on the headphones and everything. The original had none of this stuff, which we factored the cost for making the original one, and thus, after we got our funding goal, it was about $25,000, which made sense if your books are about $2 to $3 a piece. These cost $10 to make. And our very first product, our very first project, we got our asses, excuse my language, handed to us because we did not think about this clearly enough. So when you talk about those funding goals, and I said in my previous panels, you have to be very clear about that, or you make junior mistakes like this. It is a lovely book, though.
And so you scored reputation points for meeting your obligations and producing a good book, but those were expensive reputation points.
And I am still sitting on a lot of these because he made too many. I did not ask for all of them. But if you do not have a copy, please, by all means. But to your point, Steve, I mean, that's the thing that I feel there have been a number of other campaigns where they raise, I believe there was a popular, or rather infamous video game Kickstarter. I think it was like Project Phoenix or something. It was supposed to be a lot of Japanese RPG veterans gonna make the next Final Fantasy or something like that. I think they raised $3 million. It was one of the biggest Kickstarter campaigns at the time when Kickstarter was founded, and nothing.
One of the biggest scams of all time.
I'm being generous here. But yes, and it's just, that's the thing. Going back to thinking, like, you can raise all that money, but if you were untruthful with the amount you need, or you blew it completely out of proportion, like I said in my previous panel, future creep. If you spend so much time trying out all these fantastical things, it's cross-platform against 8 platforms, including ones that don't even exist yet, well, I hope you enjoy that vaporware, and I feel utmost sympathy for anybody that backed those campaigns and got nothing out of it. So, just, yeah, gotta be careful with these things.
That's painful. I suppose I should run through the stack of games here and talk a little bit about how each one relates to our subject, which is how to do it. This one is called Tabloids. This is going to be a traditional Kickstarter in that the more support it gets, the more will go into the game. That required us to set a target price for the game that would let us make money whether it was indifferently supported and hit no stretch goals, or whether it was generously supported and hit all the stretch goals, and thus became more expensive to produce. but at the same time strengthen numbers. If we are doing a bigger print run, we should get a better price. But never assume that. Do all your print buying first. Pretend I said that 17 more times, okay? It's absolutely vital if you're producing a printed product, and I expect most of you are, to know where your cost breaks are. Know where your cost breaks are for the things that you might add. This is a set of little bitty playing cards. And that's non-standard, and we can't produce them economically in the United States. It has to go to China. And that means we have to budget in time, which is another very important thing when you're doing a Kickstarter, is leaving reasonable expectations in your supporters' minds about when they're going to get it. The bigger the project, the farther out people are willing to accept your setting it if everything else that you do is otherwise compelling. Anything to add to that?
Well, I figure you'll do one, maybe I'll do one on my end.
Fair enough. Well, I just did one. You want to?
All right, so
Okay.
I'm going to go back to our first one because, oh boy, were there so many mistakes on this. And I am going to just go through the list. So for starters, it was our very first Kickstarter campaign. We actually, me and my business partner, we did not personally use crowdfunding before, so a lot of it was kind of figure out how the system works. So besides the book, so the entire purpose was, this was originally Japanese, was to basically make an English edition of it and then, you know, get it printed and distributed outside of Japan. But of course, just offering a book, well, you think, what other rewards can there be? You can have your standard $1, hey, thank you for your support. You did it, you know, but clearly that and a book is not enough, so we had to start coming up with other things. We had enough artwork. We made very nice postcards. We made these art boards. They're called shikishi, which is kind of a popular thing in Japan to put for autographs, illustrations, and so forth. We had those made, and then, of course, we had these very lovely B2 size tapestries. These were also made for the campaign, but...
Ooh, can I see?
Oh, there. Oh.
Clunk. Oh, that's nice.
I swear I'm better at this and not knocking things over. But so here leads into one of the many mistakes we made on this, because as you can see, this is a very long item. This is not a long item. How do you pack them together? Guess what? You don't.
With great difficulty.
So
Yes.
the post office has these very nice priority, they call them board game boxes.
Yes.
And so, actually, those didn't fit. We had to get different ones from Uline. But the same idea, we thought, oh, well, you know, if I put this tapestry at a diagonal with the book, it takes up less space and we can pack them all together, except that leaves a lot of empty space there. And, oh boy, did we have apparently a lot of trashed rewards sent
You
out.
would get crush problems. Yeah. One of the first things we learned was that we had to think very hard about user packaging, not the box that you see here, but the box that it's going to travel to the user in, along with whatever stretch goals might have been hit. Now, here, I'll do these all at once because they're all examples of the same kind of thing. These are all campaigns that were done without stretch goals. We just told people what was going to be in them and asked if they wanted to support. And fortunately, they did. And here come the games. In this case, in Tribes, there simply wasn't anything else to add, and there wasn't any room in the box. In the case of these two, we looked at our worst case, our low support case, and said the game will be considerably less fun if these stretch goals are not met. Furthermore, they're expensive, so the game will seem like a ripoff if we don't promise them at first. So we ended up taking everything for both these games that we had originally conceived as stretch goals and just rolling it into the original package and saying, here, give us a quantity of money, but in return you get a complete package.
So, Steve, actually, I have a question for you because this was another thing that we had to deal with. So, I was talking about how we had some damaged rewards on my first campaign.
Yes.
Because we unfortunately, again, did not plan this out enough, those fancy artboards, which I don't have any here, we printed an exact amount.
Ooh.
200 of them for backers, printed 200, 30 of them got trashed, and we had to issue refunds. So, in your case, like, do you take a percentage or decide I have 1,000 backers, I'm going to have a buffer of 50 to 60, or are those considerations that you had to think about?
Those are not considerations for us as much because we always plan to continue a game in print after the Kickstarter. So there will be a buffer. Sometimes the buffer is in the thousands. WizWar, that still wasn't enough. We're having to go back to print on that because there was so much distributor demand after the Kickstarter. It was a good Kickstarter, and the distributors looked at it and said, we like this game. Some games are not designed to go into distribution, and those we will sell on our own site, Warehouse23, plug, for whatever period until they run out. But either way, we've always got a buffer.
No, that's definitely good that you had that planned out because I'll go with another of our campaigns. This is probably not our best campaign, but it's probably one of our most famous. So for a lot of people who are fans of visual novels, Clannad is basically viewed as in the pantheon of the best visual novel games out there. It is at the top of the hill, top of the mountain, as far as I can tell, despite a game being nearly 20 years old. The 20th anniversary, I believe, is next year. Just throw that out there. And so there has been a perception that basically this company, Visual Arts, does not want to sell their games in the West. And we proved everybody wrong. We got a license, and we started making it happen. And it raised like $500,000. It was an amazing campaign. Nice. We had a beautiful box for the game, soundtracks, these stretch goals. It was a comic done by a lot of the manga artists that actually worked on the comicalizations of a lot of the properties. And in fact, the stretch goal had a second game, the side story here. But in the case Steve was mentioning, because a lot of it, there are some that were meant for distribution to other retailers or selling directly, there are a number of our clients that we work with where it's like, no, you're making this just for the campaign, you can't sell this afterwards, which is extremely unfortunate. So with stuff like this, it's like, it is really you snooze, you lose, because the PC physicals, we have 10 in our office that basically is under lock and key. We do not take them out for any reason. They're also numbered, just to kind of throw that out there. And so these are things that sometimes it is unfortunate where I would love to see a lot of the stuff reprinted. They gave us a permission to sell these because we had a few extra, but for the other stuff, there are cases where it's like, it's one and done, no more. And it's a perception, unfortunately, I feel, this is more of a critique of the Japanese gaming industry than specific Kickstarter, but these are things to think about, that if you are creating something, you have control of the supply and everything else, in case of the games you design. For us as publishers, we have to work with the clients, the creators themselves, and we have to convince them, you should sell these afterwards. There's a value to it. Some people agree, not all of them do. So these are things you do have to think about, when it comes to crowdfunding.
That's interesting. And so the only way to address that would have been in the initial license negotiations.
They were very... Stubborn is a kind of a rude way of looking at it, but sometimes it's
adamant is what we say about people we want to compliment when they're stubborn.
You've got that right. I mean, their tensions have it's warming up in terms of how we work with each other in the past decade, but at the time it was still a little bit of the mistrust of, I don't really trust you guys. You guys aren't from around here. I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. Dirty Americans. Got it.
Okay. This one is our current Kickstarter. This is up right now, and if my description amuses you, please support it. The game is called Caligula. This is an adult game, a party game, a drinking game, if you will. The idea is to make rules and to follow the rules and therefore not have to drink while tricking the other players into failing to follow the rules, and thus either getting their game money away from them or getting them to drink, in which case they will arguably have a better time, but become less able to follow the next rules. It's based on the story of the famously dissolute Roman Emperor Caligula. Oh, fun fact, Caligulae were the Roman soldiers' super strong sandals. They were as much boot as sandal. His nickname was Caligula, which is little boots, because when he was a child he liked wearing those shoes. So he was the Emperor Bootsy. But in this game, he's just your patron as you drink yourself into happiness and owning all the money. So the Kickstarter for this game does not include anything that you need to play the game, but there are stretch goals that tie into the branding and make it more fun to play the game. The first stretch goal, which I think we've already hit, is a set of coasters that will come with each game that repeat the basic rules of the game on the coaster. The second stretch goal, which the last time I looked we had not hit, was each game will come with a shot glass with the Caligula cartoon on it. And I hope we make that, because if we do make that, we will do a serious run of the shot glasses, and we hope to sell a number of extras for people who like their glasses in pairs or sixes. Though that the add-on is something that we haven't talked about yet, but that's something that you should really keep in mind when you do a Kickstarter. What other products, either related to the campaign or just appealing to the same people, can you do to bulk up your total support? Do you do add-ons at all?
Yes, we definitely do. The thing that, I don't know how you have done it in the past, but one of the things that I would say perhaps is the shortcomings of Kickstarter is I don't feel it has a very good, robust system for supporting add-ons. You can add more to your play. You can put on your page $20 for this add-on, $30 for this one, so on and so forth, and to add that to your pledge, and then you're going to have to figure out. For people who have not used Kickstarter, the back end, while it has a lot of tools, a lot of information, you're kind of on your own for a lot of the organizations.
It could be friendlier, yes.
Just a little bit more, maybe. You know, it's just one of those things. But so we use a site called BackerKit. I don't know if you guys use that.
Absolutely, we depend on BackerKit.
Yeah, because so BackerKit basically is an additional support. It's a different company that you use to better organize the information of the backers, how to organize shipping, and in our case, it has a very robust system for supporting digital downloads. So, like I said, a lot of our games, it's to fund the release on Steam or elsewhere. So you would go into your BackerKit account to get your downloads, either your zip files or just Steam codes and stuff, and it has a very good way of doing add-ons. So once your campaign is over, the nice part about BackerKit is it sends information to the backer. It's like, hey, you backed the campaign, here's access to the site, and it gives you the opportunity, like, say you didn't have enough money to really back it, you're like, I'm going to do the $1 access to the BackerKit. Just, it wasn't happening this month, paychecks and stuff like that, and by the time it opens, well, guess what? That thing you wanted, you can get the add-ons, and so it's great for the backers and it's good for us creators because it allows the opportunity to further augment the funds that have been raised, especially if it's a need for, whatever may come up with the case. And it's a good organizational tool. They do take a chunk of the proceeds, so when you're doing the math on your funding, think about how much Kickstarter takes, how much payment processing through Stripe takes, how much BackerKit takes. These are kind of like a lot of the fees you have to look into when you're creating your funding goals.
You will be sharing the money with BackerKit. They do take their piece, but it's worth it.
100%.
They do good work. They do work that otherwise you would have to reinvent. Pay them and use them. That's probably the strongest piece of advice I've given yet today. BackerKit also has their own crowdfunding set up.
That's right. That's a new thing they've introduced recently.
It's fairly new. It was BackerKit was set up as part of the Kickstarter ecosystem. It depended on Kickstarter, and so it was kind of a race. Is Kickstarter going to improve its platform to the point where BackerKit it no longer has a point, or is BackerKit going to set up its own crowdfunding front end? And BackerKit won that race. It set up its own crowdfunding front end. The bugs are not all out yet.
It is interesting to see. It's interesting that Kickstarter, as you said, they did not act upon the fact that, because I think there are other competing sites as well besides BackerKit. That's the only one we've ever used. That they did not look at this and say, why are we not cutting out the middleman? Let's add those features that they're giving, us, the crowdfunding creators. But it is what it is. I mean, this is how things continue. So I'm curious to see how effective, using BackerKit as your crowdfunding platform is. It's not something we've thought about, but I'm curious about the results.
We're going to give them a try in the future. But the future isn't here yet. I'm going to let them practice on other people for a little bit longer.
See, that's why you are the wise man in the room here.
Well, we've been working at it long enough. Let's hope that some of it is stuck. I have one more campaign to tell you about, and that's one that hasn't even started yet. This is a licensed book done by Three Ravens Publishing. This is an advanced copy. Three Ravens has the license from us to do fiction based in the universe of Car Wars. And their goods, when they do their Kickstarter, will be almost entirely digital. We're not yet at the point where you can publish a book without making some real books, but they are not going to be in the business of selling the physical book over Kickstarter unless you, the customer, are crazy and willing to pay crazy prices. What they will do is sell you a key that lets you print on demand with, for instance, Amazon. They are also selling as upgrades non-physical rewards like getting written into one of the upcoming books. It's called Tuckerization in sci-fi fandom. I don't know if anime has another term for it or not.
I don't think so, but I mean there's similar things that we've kind of toyed with as well, like the standard stuff of just getting your name in the credits, but there's other things we've taken steps on, but fairly.
Right.
You finish this one first.
Anyway, this one is moving forward, and their job will be made a lot simpler by the fact that they will not be sending out many physical rewards. There will be less shipping, less opportunity for things to get messed up in shipping. Oh, we don't ship to overseas addresses anymore as part of the Kickstarters. Since COVID, the international shipping has just become less and less reliable, and it got to the point where between expenses and damages in shipping, we couldn't make a dime on the overseas sales. So we stopped. And that led to complaints, but the answer we give them is the honest one. We can't make any money selling to you. We'd love for you to have the game, but we can't make any money off of you, and we have to eat. So that was that.
One of the chief complaints we get, besides the worry of things getting lost or seized, whatever the case may be, is we don't have to pay like a VAT, a value-added tax and that sort of thing, which is common in Europe, Canada, most of the world. So you get a lot of people complaining, oh my gosh, this campaign pledge rewards, which was $200, you wrote $200 on there, and they charged me, the equivalent of $30 in taxes for it, so I'm going to refuse this package. To which I say, I'm sorry you don't want to pay your country's taxes. Perhaps you should run for office and say you don't need the taxes, but you can't ask somebody running this campaign to lie about the customs declaration. But this is a common thing that's asked all the time, and it blows my mind. And there are stacks of returns where we'll give you a refund, but you really should have thought about that. That we're not going to write, that's $5, it's a gift. We're not doing that.
No.
Definitely not.
No. I have run through my programmed comments. I'm ready to take questions anytime you are. Do you have anything else to add?
Let me do one more project.
Fire away.
And then, good on time? Oh, okay, I'll be quick.
We have 20 minutes. We're
All right,
good.
I'll be quick. So while this was not from the campaign, I don't know how many people are familiar with Nekopara. This is probably one of our most famous franchises, and back in 2018, we did a campaign for the OVA and a full-on animation for this, and at the time, it was one of the most well-raised campaigns. It's, I think, number 3 and number 4 right now if you search on Kickstarter.
Nice.
It got to like 960,000, so it wasn't quite $1 million. We got $1 million after the fact with backerkin and stuff like that. But you were talking about, was the Tuckerization you're mentioning with the book there.
Yes.
So one of the one of the high tier goals, because the selling point for us is we work with a lot of illustrators. So a lot of the highest tiers is basically you get to have a hand-drawn sketch from the character designer, the illustrator. And the case, because we're making an anime here, two of the goals was basically the $9,000 tier was you can create your own cat girl, and she'll be a background character and will be listed in the credits as a credited character. And then we had a $10,000 goal, which was your character actually appears and has spoken lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, that's $10,000. That's insane amount of money. And lo and behold, it was one of the first things to sell out.
How many?
One, because if we did more than that, the animation company would probably be upset. Like, no, do not complicate this.
Okay.
But it was a thing, and literally she had one spoken line, and it was hello or konnichiwa, and that was it. And I'm like, was that worth $10,000? I mean, you got a lot of stuff. The Blu-ray, big old box, art book. You got a sketch from the creator who, by the way, does not do commissions. For starters, she's a busy woman. She has better things to do. And you got your own character and all this stuff. And when I asked the guy, because he came to Anime Expo the year we released this, because the creator Sayuri was a guest there, and it was like, no regrets. Happiest I've ever been. I'm like,
Cool.
More power to you, sir. You did it. So there are these things that when you're talking about augmenting your campaign, if you have connections to a creator with the illustrators where you can add the extra stuff, that is a great way of augmenting your campaign, as long as they're willing to do it. They must be willing to do it.
Yes. Although one way to get them to be willing to do it is to share the take.
That's real advice there.
All right. I think that's the presentation. We're open for questions. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so everybody else can hear.
Hello. So for both of you, your companies are pretty well known, and if you were to do a Kickstarter, people are like, "Oh, I already know Steve Jackson and Sekai Project." So I think that the marketing probably has some stuff built in. But if somebody is starting for the first time, what are the assets that you think are like you definitely need, and what kind of promotions? For example, like, do you think for any project like a trailer is really necessary? Is a press release good? Do you need to have your own like Twitter account? Like, what do you, in your opinions for each of your projects, what do you think are like the absolute must-haves for initial marketing?
What is the general nature of your project?
Oh, I don't
And
have
can
one. I'm
answer
just
better.
curious.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Just
I just like talking about marketing.
Generally, it's going to be a thing. Okay, you don't, this is my opinion, Chris will give you his own. You don't have to have a video trailer at the beginning. It's good if you have a good one. I have seen campaigns sunk by an inept trailer. People didn't even scroll past the trailer because it was, oh, these are idiots. And when one I'm thinking of that wasn't fair because they had a good game, but they thought they could make their own trailer, and they weren't good at that. Press release, depends on whether you've got a good list to send it to, and that would depend entirely on your experience and whatever field you were in. These days, sometimes there's nobody to send a press release to unless you're going to start hiring influencers. Twitter, I don't want to give Elon any money. I've already given Elon too much money.
I understand.
Social media in general, yeah. But that particular one I think is on the downslide.
I understand that.
So I actually echo a lot of the sentiments, especially with the trailer, no trailer, the press releases and all that. So first of all, the thing is, I really think it depends on what the thing is. So I will talk about specifically in the realm I'm experiencing, which is, video games and computer games. The trailer, it does help because what you're trying to do is, whether it's a still image or a trailer, you want the users to stay on your page. If you bore them to death, I don't care what your trailer is, if it has nothing to do with what they care about, you're going to navigate away from the page. How many times do you think you've been to an Amazon page, GameStop page, where you're just kind of like, hey, that's not for me, you just scroll away? It happens happens all the time. So I think these things are important, but at the same time, again, you have to think about what it is. So with games, we were talking about digital rewards earlier, that it is a thing. It's a great cost-saving measure, but the thing is, our users are going to look like, why would I back a digital product when I'll just wait till it comes out on Steam? Which, you're not wrong. And so for us, you have to find some incentives while keeping your costs reasonable of things that you care about. Like, if you're trying to target collectors, you're like, it's got a box. You want the box. If you're trying to target somebody who's a fan of Japanese voice talent, I have a limited tier. You can get the voice talent. They will autograph an autograph board for you. They will say a little thing to you, which was the thing we offered, or it's like a little 10-second clip from your favorite voice talent, or will illustrate your favorite character from there. So these are the things that you would have to do if you're doing a game, but if it's any other thing, it really depends. And I think having a compelling goal, like if you're like, $500, I'm just doing this thing, lists a couple rewards that the tiers, the differences, they don't make sense. You go from 5 to 500, and it's like, where's the in between? It's the same thing as you go into a restaurant. You're going to not look at the cheap thing because it's too cheap. The expensive thing, too expensive. You want what's just right, in the middle. Maybe do an early bird thing. There are these things that you have to think about. And Kickstarter, just like Steam, is a very good promotional tool. So your press release, unless you have a robust press list, is probably going to be useless because Kickstarter will effectively do it all for you. And it's all organic. The more you raise, the more it'll be like, hey, Kickstarter hot pick. And that's where it keeps on going from there.
It might be useful, depending on the product, to buy some Facebook advertising pointing to the Kickstarter, especially in the very early days, because you want the momentum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? Don't be shy. Step on up.
Or go ahead, be shy as long as you talk.
I'm just wondering for Chris, moving from print materials to digital materials, how differently would you feel, or would you say the marketing was for that?
Oh, sorry. Could you repeat that again?
Moving from print materials to digital materials, selling that, how different would you say the experience was, especially marketing for it?
So the thing is, since the Moe Headphones book is the only print product that we've ever tried doing at Kickstarter, I felt that we were basically highly tied down by what we can offer, because at the end of the day, people are backing a book for the purpose of getting the book. So what else can you offer besides the book? And that became that was a challenge in itself. It was also the first time doing a campaign. But again, when you talk about games, because the market right now, whether you like it or not, it's basically going all digital. People that buy physical are collectors, and that's how you target things. So it becomes easier to market digital for what it's worth, because low cost of entry, low cost in general. It doesn't cost you anything to make a bunch of keys. So that part is, so I'm not saying don't do digital. You should. Your digital rewards are going to make up a large chunk of how much you're going to get from backers. But if it gets you to the 50% mark, where do you go from there? And some of the experience from doing the book, making the shikishi, the tapestries and stuff, if you've seen our previous campaigns, we repeated that. You'd have tapestries, a box, art book, comic, and things like that. So for us who are doing games, a good game campaign has to be a mix of both, because there will be somebody that's like, I don't need the things, that just give me the keys and make sure it's cheaper than when it's released to retail. And that's an important thing, is if you tell your backer your digital game, the digital game tier is $20, and then you sell it for 10 on Steam, you are ripping people off, because there's the idea that you're an early adopter pre-ordering, you're getting the pre-order discount. And if you don't want to piss everybody off, try to make it close. If it's 20, make it 20. If it's 18, well, maybe somebody will understand that. So these are the things you have to think about. And with a good balance of items, and not overwhelm yourself, I think, you make a good campaign out of that.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? If there is really nothing else, then we are done, and you have an extra 10 minutes to make your next panel.
Yeah.
Last chance. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys.